Coming up, Alabama reportedly loses a key player to injury, and Florida apparently has gained a key player via transfer. We'll tell you all about it next right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to AT&T SEC Country Live. And I know this is a little bit of a corny analogy, but it does to a certain degree feel almost like Christmas Eve for college football fans, with early signing period set to begin on Wednesday. This is the day before, almost a Christmas Eve-like vibe, as a lot of programs around the SEC are going to add some big-time talent here over the next few days.
Ton of great players. Brenton Cox, Cade Mays, James Cook, Micah Parsons, all announcing tomorrow where they're going to go to school. So
yeah, it's an exciting time. So we'll cover a lot of that for a lot of the SEC throughout our program here. If you're an Arkansas fan, we're also going to follow, I believe, Jerry Bohannon expect to make his announcement coming up in the next few minutes as well. If that happens, if he chooses the Hogs, we'll kind of break in live, talk about that a little bit with our Arkansas friends. But before that, let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. And of course, in addition to what's going on in the early signing period, you also have preparations for the college football playoff. That is where we begin today. Item number one on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and it is apparently bad news here for Alabama. Mike, let me show you what Matt Zenitz has reported for AL.com. He writes that Alabama's lost yet another linebacker to a significant injury. Standout freshman inside linebacker Dylan Moses suffered what's feared to be a season-ending foot injury during the Crimson Tide's practice on Monday. AL.com has learned Moses' injury is a broken foot, according to sources. So that's Zenitz on the scene there with Alabama practice. Dylan Moses, you don't talk about recruiting, you go back to the class of 2017, Moses was essentially one of the very top players in the entire country. A big recruiting win for Alabama, a guy they have played this year, but according to sources here from AL.com, not going to have Dylan Moses for the playoff. You watch every Alabama game as closely as anybody does. I'm going to turn to you for how significant you think this injury is for Alabama.
Well, I'll say this much. If it's not for the guys coming back, with the Mac Wilson, Christian Millers of the world coming back into this game, this would have been absolutely detrimental. I mean, you're this injury away from inserting probably a defensive back sitting there playing next to Keith Holcomb for a lot of this game. You have so many injuries at the linebacker position, and they've continued to mount up, and Sean Deon Hamilton, and Mac Wilson's trying to come back, and all these injuries at the same positions. And finally, you feel like you're gaining ground, and a guy like Dylan Moses, who has learned a ton over the last few weeks. He didn't play very much against Mississippi State. He plays against Mercer in the game before the Iron Bowl, gets like 11 tackles, 4 TFLs, an interception. Everybody says he's trending upwards. Go out there, doesn't play that well against Auburn, plays kind of okay, and then here you have this injury, and it's another setback for the Alabama linebacking core. They're okay right now. Mac Wilson's going to be okay. He's going to get back to 100%. Keith Holcomb's right there. You're going to see Rashaan Evans at the linebacker position. But, man, it is thin right now. One injury during this game could spell a disaster for Alabama.
So Jeremy Pettis kind of agrees in the comments section the fact that Mac Wilson, Christian Miller could be coming or are coming back here. That's obviously helps you sort of weather the blow of the Dylan Moses injury. But as a guy who played the game, and this is one of those deals where I literally don't really know the answer to this, can you expect Wilson and Miller, two very good players, are they going to be themselves returning from injury here this first game back? I mean, is that the expectation here?
If this were a normal work week, if you were in the middle of the season and you were going in, from game 6 to game 7, I would say no. There's no way that you can get back and play the potential that you played out before the injury. But being that it's bowl practice, being that we're still December 18th, 19th when these injuries are occurring, I still think there's time for them to get back to themselves. I think that you'll see Mac Wilson step right back into that role. He was already on the cusp of being back to himself for the Iron Bowl. Now, given a couple of weeks and a couple of more weeks from now to get ready for the Clemson game, I think he'll be as close to 100% as you can be. Now, is this guy going to be the defensive MVP? Is he going to be flying around getting 2 interceptions and a bunch of sacks? I don't know. But at least you have a guy that you can plug in place of Dylan Moses and a guy you expect to play a ton in Mac Wilson.
Terry Crews says, hate to see these guys hurt. And while I'm not an Alabama fan, I do agree with that as well. When you tune in to watch one of these big-time games, you want kind of all hands on deck. Right. You want healthy players on both sides. Clemson, the reigning national champion, Alabama, the national champion from the year before. They played each other the last 2 years. Each team has won once. in this great sort of third episode of the trilogy, you want both sides to have a full complement of players. So, I mean, I think to a certain extent, although we're already hearing from some non-Alabama fans kind of mocking some bad luck and some bad news for the Crimson Tide, while some people may feel that way, I do find myself sort of agreeing with the notion of, hey, for a great game, a great college football playoff like this, you want everybody that can play to be available.
Right, and it's not like an injury to Dylan Moses you're going to say. This is not Mika Fitzpatrick. This is not Jalen Hurts. This is not Calvin Ridley. So you got to look at a guy like Dylan Moses and understand what he's been for the last couple of weeks. Not the entire season. He had to step in after Sean Deion Hamilton got injured, and he did a great job of gaining traction in the last few weeks. But just another injury to this one specific position, I think, is what's so crazy about it. And coming into the year, a lot of people around the program wondered if this wouldn't be Nick Saban's best linebacking core yet. You know, you lose a guy like Reuben Foster, but Rashaan Evans, Christian Miller, Dylan Moses adding to it. There's a ton of five-star players at the linebacker position that just have not been able to get on the field this year.
Jared Bogarty says, even though that those guys, Miller and Mack Wilson, are back, you still need depth. And I think that Jared is touching on an important point here, that Alabama's depth, and you also alluded to this a moment ago as well, Alabama's depth here in this Sugar Bowl game against Clemson is severely limited now because of the Dylan Moses injury.
You're already dealing with the injury to Hootie Jones. He's out now for the bowl game. You're having to kind of mix and match back there in the secondary for a lot of older guys. But now with Dylan Moses out, you look at a guy like Keith Holcomb, who struggled in particular instances against Mississippi State, had to kind of, I don't want to say be removed from the starting lineup, but you had to switch some things around heading into that Iron Bowl. Now Keith Holcomb becomes a really big part of this game plan. Now you look at a guy like that that's going to have a ton of snaps, you're going to have to lean on him to make some plays.
Brad Tisdale says, while this is a setback to Dylan Moses' injury, does anybody realize that the bar is it's a far bigger problem with Clemson's defensive line destroying Alabama's offensive line? You know offensive line. You certainly know the Alabama offensive line. Do you agree with what Brad's saying here, that a bigger issue than the Dylan Moses injury is how Alabama's offensive line blocks the Clemson group, which may be the best in the country?
I think that's the biggest question going into the game. Now, I will say this much. When you look at the linebacking core and you look at what Kelly Bryant is, the speed he has from the quarterback position and the things they do offensively, a linebacking core, if you're not very good in some of those instances, you're going to get exposed too. And so you can look at what Alabama's offensive line does against Clemson's defensive line. They struggled at times last year. Their offensive line up front has struggled at times this year. But I think the linebacking core is right there, maybe 1B right there next to that offensive line. When you look at the way that Clemson kind of constructs their offense and what Kelly Bryant does, you have to have speed at the second level, and that's what Alabama's going to be lacking if Dylan Moses obviously can't play.
Ross Kelso's got an interesting comment. He says, being an Alabama fan is stressful or spoiled. And, you know, Alabama fans have obviously enjoyed a lot of success in recent years, but when you think about the number of injuries that are compiling for Alabama this year, you almost wonder, I mean, is this just one of those years in which, I hate to say destined for bad luck because that seems superstitious. I don't mean it that way, but it is possible to have just too much bad luck line up in the same year. And for Alabama, a lot of this has been sort of centered around the linebacker position. I mean, some years it's just not your year, right?
It's tough. It's tough, and I think it makes it even tougher when you outlook towards next year. Yeah, you're going to have a ton of quality players next year on this defense, but look at maybe losing your top 6 defensive backs going into next year, depending on what Ronnie Harrison decides to do, because Minka's going to be gone, Tony Brown. A lot of those players on this defense are going to be destined for the NFL. So it's not like one of those deals where you say, oh, we'll get everybody back healthy next year and we'll try to make a run at this. It's going to be an uphill climb for this year and for next year.
Steve Devin's final comment on the subject says, Bama's set up where they want to be. Bama is going to roll Clemson, then they're going to beat up Oklahoma. So Steve's still pretty confident on that. We'll see how it plays out. Let me move on to item number 2 here on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Florida getting some good news is Van Jefferson, the recent Ole Miss wide receiver, who's compiled nearly 1,000 yards receiving in his 2 years there in Oxford. He tweets out his intention to be a part of the Florida Gators. As succinctly, as simply as it can be said, chomp, chomp, with the Gator emoji. I view Van Jefferson showing up at Florida. Now, we still don't know yet if he'll be eligible in 2018. He's got to apply for that. It could happen. I guess it could not. You never really know with the NCAA.
Yeah.
But adding a guy like Van Jefferson, I think is a big get for Florida here. Do you agree?
I definitely do, too. You add in the fact that Antonio Callaway is destined for the NFL, and obviously Florida's got a ton of talent come back at the wide receiver position. Dre Massey, Tyree Cleveland, Josh Hammond, those guys are going to be there. But a guy like Van Jefferson can change the fortunes of this program. He can come in and be that number one guy. And Florida, obviously, and Ole Miss the same way, an embarrassment of riches at the wide receiver position this past year. this continues it for Florida, and Ole Miss kind of takes a step back. So I think it's definitely a big deal. I think this is a win, for this program, win for Dan Mullen to go out and get a transfer of this magnitude. And I think if he is allowed to play next year, it becomes a huge difference in the SEC East.
Terrence Collins, who's a Georgia fan, says that Van Jefferson's going from one dumpster fire to another. I don't know that Florida is. I mean,
listen, Florida is a lot of things right now, but dumpster fire is not the word. When you look at the last week they've had, and obviously there's going to be ups and downs. You have a lot of the turnover, but you're getting a guy like Van Jefferson, and then all of a sudden Emory Jones is looking like he might flip when that could have been a dumpster fire, looking like he might flip to Florida. I think things are looking up for the Gators for sure.
Yeah, I think that they absolutely are, and I think that Van Jefferson, I think one of the most underrated stories in college football in general is the addition of transfer players. I just think you're bringing in guys. Now, we don't know about his eligibility yet, but when you bring in a transfer player, you're sort of bringing in someone that's already sort of game ready in a way that a lot of freshmen are not going to. A lot of these freshman wide receivers that have been talked about right now over the next 3 days are guys that won't contribute for their team for another 2 years anyway. In Van Jefferson's case, if he gets the waiver from the NCAA, he's good enough to contribute for Florida next year. And you mentioned the list. Tyree Cleveland I like, guys like Ham and the rest, I'm not sure they're game-breaking players, but Jefferson sort of steps into not just, Florida's best wide receiver, which I believe he would compete with Tyree Cleveland to be. I think Jefferson would become one of the more proven wide receivers in the SEC East probably.
Yeah, I agree, and you're going to have issues at quarterback next year for Florida. I mean, let's go ahead and get that out of the way. You got Felipe Franks on the roster. We've mentioned a couple times, I don't think he fits Dan Mullen's system. If you do land in Emory Jones, I think the sky's the limit, but let's not forget that he would be a true freshman playing next year. And so this wide receiver core becomes a big deal. The running backs become a big deal. The offensive line, everything other than the quarterback becomes a little bit bigger deal because of that quarterback position. I think landing a guy in Van Jefferson who's been around the block in the SEC and sliding into the SEC East, I'm with you. I think he becomes a big deal when you look at this division.
Yeah, I think that's probably true as well. And obviously, it's an issue when you talk about Emory Jones, who we'll talk about later on the show. It looks like he may be trending towards Florida right now. But him signing with Florida so late, or I should say committing to Florida so late in the process, signing during the early signing period, normally you think of quarterbacks as guys who have coattails, who bring other people with them into the Florida program. With the way this timing works of him committing during the early signing period, a lot of the other elite receivers in the country may go elsewhere. Emory Jones may not have the same chance to bring in offensive weapons with him to a signing class the way other quarterbacks might. That, I think, makes the importance of a Van Jefferson all the greater.
Yeah, and we mentioned Antonio Callaway. You're also losing a guy like Brandon Powell, who's a little bit of a do-all for that Florida offense this past couple of years. And I think those are big shoes to fill. Obviously, Antonio Callaway didn't play, and he kind of leaves his mark at Florida as a guy, being what could have been. But all of a sudden, Van Jefferson plugs in, and a lot of Florida fans, probably once Van Jefferson hits the field, you say, Antonio Callaway who? Like, this guy's pretty good. He's got the size. He's got the ability. He's got the speed. He's got really everything you want in a wide receiver to kind of make plays over the top and make plays in the middle
of the
field.
And as Sharvin Berrien brings up in the comments section, I'm interested to see how new coach Dan Mullen, who has an offensive mind, works with Damian Pierce, the centerpiece right now, I think, of Florida's recruiting class, the running back from Bainbridge, Georgia, a Van Jefferson if he's eligible, an Emory Jones, and it may be asking Jones to do a little too much to be able to play as a freshman. I don't think he's as college football ready as Matt Corral would have been. Different kind of players, different kind of skill sets. I think that Corral may be more college ready than Emory Jones is, at least based on what I've seen, based on what I've heard from other people. But seeing how Dan Mullen works with these offensive weapons is going to be an interesting thing to watch for.
Yeah, and listen, I don't know what Dan Mullen's going to do offensively next year. You also have a guy like Kadarius Toney coming back, who was a huge figure in that Wildcat game they ran last year in Florida's offense. I think it's going to be up to Dan Mullen. I think that he has the offensive edge when you talk about the way he's been able to craft some of these offenses at Mississippi State. I don't think he looks at it and says, man, what can we do offensively at the quarterback position? Because this is a guy who has built quarterbacks in his history. So I think he looks at it and says, you know what? We got all these playmakers outside, more playmakers than I've ever had in my career. All of a sudden, it looks like there's got a lot of upside on this offense depending on who's playing quarterback.
Let me do item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Life First in 10 list. And I think this is a pretty interesting development to watch here as it relates to Alabama recruiting and Tennessee recruiting as well. J.J. Peterson is not going to sign until February, but he's one of the elite prospects in the entire country, certainly right here in the South. He hails from Colquitt County, which is down in southwest Georgia. Colquitt played for the Georgia State Championship, the highest classification over the weekend. And after the game was over, Peterson spoke with our Chris Kirshner, who covers Alabama recruiting for SECCountry.com. Peterson's long since been thought to be an Alabama lean, even though he isn't officially committed. Now that Jeremy Pruitt's gone from Tuscaloosa, now the head coach at Tennessee, Peterson's sort of singing a different tune. Peterson says, I have a strong connection with Coach Pruitt and Coach Shearer. That's the new defensive coordinator at Tennessee, who was the linebackers coach at Georgia, the key recruiter for Peterson from the Georgia side of things. He says, I also have 2 former teammates who were there as well. I know people there. Coach Pruitt leaving has changed the whole game for me. And Peterson told SEC Country over the weekend that he now views Tennessee as his leader, despite the fact that he's never been to Tennessee before. He's never visited, but it shows you the bond that he thinks that he has with the new Tennessee coach, Jeremy Pruitt. What do you make of this in terms of the seismic shift potentially brought about by Pruitt moving from Alabama to Tennessee?
It's interesting, and you add in the fact that Kevin Scherer's another guy who's kind of recruiting him, and he had relationships with both those guys, and all of a sudden they land at the same place, and it's no wonder they become the leader. I mean, he hasn't been to Knoxville, but he mentioned it. He's a guy that builds his recruiting on relationships. Mentioned that he didn't really have a ton of conversations with Nick Saban. Didn't really know anybody else in Tuscaloosa other than a couple people, and so I think that you're going to see him go up to Tennessee, obviously feel his way around that, look at what his options are. I think Alabama gets a second look, but I'm not shocked if he lands at a place like Tennessee. If everything he's built over the last couple of recruiting cycle, the last year has been with Jeremy Pruitt and Kevin Shearer, and they're both in the same place, I'd be hard-pressed to think he lands anywhere else.
Tyler Mann says Pruitt and Kirby are going to do some damage to Alabama recruiting, and I think you're already seeing that a little bit with Kirby Smart in Georgia. I think you're going to see some of that with Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee here as well, because ultimately, I actually don't think J.J. Peterson is going to end up at Tennessee. I think that may be a little too much too soon for the Vols. But the fact that Peterson would change his sort of declared leader, even if it's not a commit situation. But if he changes his declared leader on the basis of the relationship he has with Jeremy Pruitt, to me that's all the more evidence and the reason why Tennessee hired Jeremy Pruitt in the first place, because he does have the kind of cachet among big-time players like J.J. Peterson. If you haven't followed his career, you just saw some video highlights of him. This is a really big-time player. This is one of the centerpieces, I think, of Alabama's class by the time it's all said and done. But the fact that Pruitt moving could hold that much sway with him shows you why Tennessee valued Jeremy Pruitt when it's all said and done.
Yeah, Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart, I mean, when you add both those guys together, and we're going to talk about recruiting a lot in the next couple of days, but you just look at a guy like Jacob Copeland out of Pensacola. It was a Florida commit, and then, looks at Alabama, and then all of a sudden, Jeremy Pruitt gets that job in Knoxville, and he's up there on an official visit. He's up there having a blast up in Knoxville. He's meeting a bunch of the other recruits that could possibly go to Tennessee. He's involving himself in this recruiting class, and that to me speaks volumes about what Jeremy Pruitt has done and the sway that he has over some of these guys. Kirby Smart, we mentioned it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. He's really put a fence up around the state of Georgia where Nick Saban's had a lot of success. We're going to see Brenton Cox make his decision tomorrow. That's a guy who 3 years ago might be a slam dunk for Nick Saban over there in Georgia. It's just not the case anymore. Kirby Smart has a ton of pull with these in-state guys in Georgia, and they're both doing a lot of things to harm Nick Saban right now.
Saban does an in-school visit with Brenton Cox, the five-star defensive end from Stockbridge, last week, right before the end of the weekend, start of the weekend. You don't normally see Saban lose out on recruits that he did basically an in-hometown, in-school visit with a couple days before the final weekend of recruiting. That could happen with Brenton Cox. But here's the one thing I'd be concerned with as a Tennessee fan. And I don't mean this in any way to troll the Vols. I just think it's a point worth bringing up. When you look at Jeremy Pruitt and the influence he has over a guy like J.J. Peterson, a big-time recruit, that's a lot of reason for you to be excited about what your coach might be able to do in recruiting. But there are no silver medals in recruiting either. There is no prize for finishing second. The thing I'd be really concerned about is Jeremy Pruitt good enough to get me into second place with a lot of recruits, but not I don't want to say that Jeremy Pruitt's not good enough, but the challenge is too great to move from that number 2 spot to the number 1. I have full confidence to say that Pruitt can at least get you to number 2, second choice, for a lot of big-time recruits. But you don't get a silver medal. You got to move into that winning spot with a lot of these guys, and there's still a lot of work to be done for Tennessee in that regard.
And I'll just say this about Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee, too. I don't think the timing could be any worse for the circumstances surrounding this week and the last couple of weeks. I think that you would have seen Kirby Smart maybe struggle a little bit more in year one had he not, had this early signing period been in place. Jeremy Pruitt's still working in Alabama and having to worry about this December 20th signing day. So I don't think he's been allowed to hit the ground running like some of the other guys have that have been in other places and have been trying to get some of these early recruits on board. I think that Tennessee, it's just a series of bad timing, if you ask me, about what's going on this year in recruiting for them.
Terrence Collins brings up an interesting point in the comments section. He says he thinks that Tennessee may be better than Florida next year. And obviously, we got a lot of time to do our 2018 previews. The calendar hasn't even turned to 2018 yet.
Yeah, give us 6 months.
But I do think that Terrence brings up kind of an interesting point in that a lot of what we've said about Tennessee and Florida the last couple of days has been about long-range stuff. Who's your quarterback of the future? You know, how are you building your roster towards the future? Is Dan Mullen the right hire? Is Jeremy Pruitt the right hire? But for the Gators fans and the Vols fans who watch our show every day or listen to the podcast every day, you know, there is a sense of, hey, we got to play a season next year as well. I think in both of these teams, in terms of Tennessee and Florida, I do think there is some legitimate concern, maybe especially on the Florida side, that it's just not quite in place yet for what's going to be on the field in 2018. You know, these fans don't want to take a year off, even if the future's bright. And I do think Terrence brings up a good point of, hey, are they going to be able to put together what they need to be able to do to field a quality team next season?
And I think that's the logical question, the next step. You know, hey, we got a coach in place. He's recruiting at a high level. All of a sudden, when is it going to hit the field? And I think that's a fair question. I don't get the sense from our comment section that either one of those fan bases are kind of panicking yet. I don't want to say panic's probably not the right word, but listen, how many times have we mentioned it? Nick Saban 7-6 in year one. Kirby Smart 8-5 last year in year one. It's going to take some time, and so I think for those fans that are out there wondering what's on the field next year, I would give it a year and a season to say, you know what, not a throwaway year, but just a rebuilding year to see if you can get back on track.
Greg Steele says that's so laughable. I don't know if he's laughing at the suggestion that Florida may have some problems in the field next season, but I mean, you brought it up before. You know, who's your quarterback going to be? You know, who
that's
your
the biggest
playmakers
thing
and
for
offense
me.
going to be? You know, the changeover to Todd Grantham on defense, a lot of those stars that Jeff Collins were using, what Todd Grantham's inheriting doesn't look like a lot of what Jeff Collins had. I mean, I do think that if you want to be concerned about 2018, I think there's a reason for that to be the case in Gainesville.
And a guy like, Taven Bryan, I think that's headed to the NFL. They had somebody announced last week was headed to the NFL. And it's just going to take some time. You're going to see a different team. You've hired a new strength coach, which I think is a big deal when you talk about some of these programs in the SEC.
They made a big point of promoting that, too.
And listen, that's a bigger deal than a lot of people realize. That's a bigger deal than some of your assistant coaches you're getting, because that is what transforms your program. If you're getting these guys in that are 5-star, great. But can you develop them? Can you get them to the top of their game? Can you make them powerful? I think that comes out in the weight room, and I think that's why you have to give it some time, honestly.
You've said this before, and we'll move off this subject after this, but in terms of your time in Alabama, what Scott Cochran was doing as the strength and conditioning coach, you had far more interaction with him than you ever did with Nick Saban. That in a lot of ways, for 12 months out of the year, you can obviously tell your own story.
Right.
But for 12 months out of the year, you almost viewed Cochran as your coach more so than Saban.
He wasn't just a strength coach. He's a player liaison. He's a go-between. When Nick Saban is out on the road recruiting, guess who you're interacting with? On Sundays, guess who you're interacting with? In the middle of March, guess who you're interacting with? It's Scott Cochran. It's the strength coach. It's the everyday guy. Yes, Nick Saban's your head coach, but he's got a lot of things going on. You worry about that strength coach getting you better in the offseason. That's a big part of these programs.
Let me move on here, and I'll remind you before we do that AT&T's proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Now, item number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10, and tomorrow does begin the early signing period for college football. It's a sort of a new era for the sport after having just one signing day in previous years in February. That day still exists. This is in addition to that, and a lot of coaches are not happy with it. And I thought that Georgia coach Kirby Smart kind of went into some detail this week about exactly what he doesn't like about this, and I think a lot of his thoughts are echoed by other coaches. Here's Coach Smart.
Yeah, it's been a great challenge. I don't think people anticipated, at least I didn't anticipate, some of the complications. First off, trying to play for a national championship, and I know there's 4 teams involved in that. And you got to look at it from both perspectives, from the perspective of us as coaches, and then also the kids. And I'm all about, if it benefits them, then it's for a better cause. I think there's going to probably be 20 to 30% of the people who signed Wednesday that this is a beneficial process. But there's a lot of other kids that feel rushed. It's been a difficult process for certain, and a little bit of that complicated by the fact that we played in the SEC championship game, and we lost a week of recruiting, and then signing date is basically upon us. So it has been very complicated, and you'd like to look into it and see who did it actually benefit and how many did it benefit.
So obviously, Nick Saban's also had some words critical of the early signing period. We could have played that as well. I think what Kirby what it says there, though, is reflective of the way a lot of coaches feel. Whether you're in the college football playoff and you're doing the double duty, or if you're worried, as Kirby Smart also alluded to there, and the full comment was long, or we had to edit it down for time. But he talked about players being dissatisfied where they land because they go because of a coach. You're going to have more coaching changeover here this year because of the addition of the 10th assistant coach. I think the bad part of early signing period far outweighs the good. I think this is a wrong step for college football. Frankly, I hope that it's changed.
Hey, it's gone in a different direction than I think anybody realized when they made the rule change. This came out as one of those things where somebody wants to get it over with. These are for legacy players. These are for guys that have been committed for a year. This wasn't supposed to be an announcement day. This was supposed to be just, hey, you know what? Anybody who wants to pay attention to Christmas with their families or is playing basketball season or wants to get on to their senior year and do all these things, or early enrollees, this was what the early signing period is for. But as you know, in college football, all these coaches go, they put in the extra effort. Yeah. Everything has to be done before the other team's doing it. So it's pushed, obviously, to get these 5-star guys signed on the dotted line on December 20th as soon as they're eligible. And it's become this extra signing day. And it's become something that not a lot of people envisioned it would be. And I'm with you. I think that there are some positives to it. I think that people want to get it knocked out and out of the way. It's a good thing.
Right.
But I think to the detriment of some of the other things that's going on. I have a lot of ideas for how they could change it, but I just don't like it the way it is now.
Bull Molinari in our comment section says he doesn't like it either. I'd be curious to find out what more people thought about that in the comment section from the perspective of a fan. Is it the same thing as what you experienced during February? And I thought you said a really interesting thing a moment ago, that it was supposed to be something a little more casual than it turned out to be. But the problem is, the guy you just heard from, Kirby Smart, and Nick Saban, and Jeremy Pruitt, and Dan Mullen, and Ed Orgeron, these guys, Gus Malzahn, they're not going to allow it to be this sort of casual, come on over here, hey, you want to get this process over with, we're going to let you go. No, listen, college football recruiting is always going to be cutthroat. I don't mean that in a negative way. It sounds harsh the way I say it, but it's going to be not just competitive, ultra competitive, zero-sum game, winner, loser. That's what this thing's going to be about. Yeah. And whether you want to do it in December or February or August or whatever the month you want to do it is, it's going to be a race to the finish line, and the best of the best programs are going to seek out the best of the best players, and there's going to be some bumps and bruises along the way because these guys throw elbows.
Yeah, everybody's out for blood. And that's how college football is. Everybody wants to be the first to do something. They want to be the hardest worker. They want to go in these kids' homes and kind of – and listen, here's how I wish it went down. I wish that once the end of the season was over, week 13 or whatever is the 12th game for all these programs, there was like a dead period. You know what? And let's have a signing day like December 10th at the end of like a 2 or 3 week dead period. And then anybody who has not committed by that point, then start your official visits. Let's not put this in the middle of bowl practice for all these teams. Let's decide who's committed and who still needs to be on the lookout. And I think that's where the NCAA went wrong.
Esteban Esteves says, so what happens to that if a recruit signs early, doesn't meet academic requirements? Does that school lose that scholarship? You lose that spot for this particular class. But that's the same risk you were taking during the February signing period as well. By the way, Shalika Kennedy in the comment section was talking about our Alabama and our Georgia helmets. She said, is that a prediction of who's going to play for the national championship? So here's the thing. If you look at our whole helmet wall, which is always a big topic of conversation, we have basically the SEC West standings here, and the SEC East standings here, and right up here, these are the two SEC teams in the playoff. But if you notice, they're not actually facing each other right now.
Yeah,
we have way too much time to think about stuff like this. So if Georgia and Alabama do play each other for the national championship, we're going to turn. Don't do it yet. See, now, he just jinxed Alabama. There you go.
I'm just
he
saying
moved
that's what
the helmet too early. You notice I didn't move the Georgia helmet.
I feel that good. I feel that good about the Sugar Bowl. I'll go ahead and turn it right now.
But if Alabama and Georgia do play each other, we will turn the helmets and face each other, and then y'all will complain about the fact that Alabama's got the wrong number on the side of the helmet.
Yeah.
So that's basically the way that's going to go there. Jeff Perry says, put that Vols helmet on. Listen, I'll tell you a quick story about this, and we'll get back to the show. So a few months ago, this is before the season started, somehow I lost some bet to you or something. I don't even know what it was.
It was the Florida State-Alabama game.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah, I put the Alabama helmet on my head. The Georgia people have been giving me grief about that ever since. I still hear about you wore that Alabama helmet on SEC Country Live.
Yeah. I won't be putting any of those helmets on. I'll tell you that. I'll put the Bama one on. That's about it.
Well, what he's not telling you is these helmets won't fit around his head.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So you don't have to worry about anything in that regard. Hey, how about some good news for South Carolina? It's item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So J.C. Horne, a guy who it seems like 9 million years ago, but we actually did his original commitment ceremony right here in these studios where we do this show from every day when Horne, the son of the former NFL wide receiver Joe Horne, committed to Tennessee. The commitment to the Vols doesn't last, though. J.C. Horne back on the open market until he tweeted this week. Take a look at J.C. Horne announcing his commitment to Will Muschamp, the University of South Carolina. I got to tell you, I think this is based on what I've seen from Horne, what I know about him. I think this is a pretty good pickup from the Gamecocks here.
Yeah, I definitely think it is too. Guy, Brian McClendon, guy obviously a lot of Georgia fans know about. Is able to get this guy kind of on board for South Carolina. And I think it is a big deal. I think when you look at what Will Muschamp is trying to build this defense into, he's known for these strong defenses. And getting a piece like this, I think this has the ability to kind of transcend classes and really send South Carolina's defense to the next level for some years to come. This is what Will Muschamp has to do. He's got to get some of these elite defensive players around the Southeast and get them to buy into the South Carolina program. This is a good step.
Christian Swigert says Muschamp for president. Stephen Tyler Peters says the mighty Muschamps flipping commits, baby. I'm happy to see South Carolina fans saying that in the comment section because I do think that's the kind of praise that Muschamp's probably due from some of his own fans here, who I think a lot of ways – what Muschamp to me feels like is a Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, and you know I like that hire for the Vols. To me, Muschamp feels like a Jeremy Pruitt just a few more years down the road.
Yeah.
A little bit more experience, a little bit more seasoned. You talk about the need to sort of bring in those elite defensive players to work the Muschamp system. The fact of the matter is you get Jemias Williams to the class of 2017. He was certainly a star player in high school. Looks like he's got a big, bright future in college. And you add a guy like J.C. Horne into that mix. All of a sudden, this South Carolina secondary does start to feel a little bit like the ones that Muschamp coached at Florida, and a little bit more like what Georgia, the reigning East winner, has done here in 2017. I think Muschamp's doing a pretty good job on the recruiting trail for South Carolina.
Yeah, and let's not forget about obviously what he learned in firing Kurt Roper. Getting rid of a guy like Kurt Roper, who at Florida, that's what he took a ton of flack for. Not being able to learn from his mistakes, not being able to move on from some of the assistant coaches that a lot of people felt like were bringing him down. Now at South Carolina here, and what is this, his 6 years as a head coach, all of a sudden you feel like he's learned a lot. He's kind of turned the corner, that maybe he understands what it takes to actually get these programs to be great in the long run in the SEC. I think he's moving in the right direction. You and I have mentioned a ton this year. He seems at peace. He really does. He seems like a coach that doesn't have the entire world kind of on his shoulders. He seems like a guy who's very comfortable with South Carolina.
Stephen Tyler Peters says that he's going to be a better coaching hire when it was made than either of the new hires this year. He's obviously referencing Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, Dan Mullen at Florida. With all due respect to Dan Mullen at Florida, who is a pretty successful coach at Mississippi State. If you gave me the choice of who had running my program, I believe I'd take Muschamp over Mullen.
I think it's tough. I still don't think Muschamp was the right fit at Florida. I think that when you look offensively at
too early in his coaching career.
Definitely too early. But I still think even if you had the chance to flip it around right now, I don't think Florida would want to do that. And it's not really about the names or not about the fact that Muschamp was at Florida before. I just think Florida needs an offensive guy. I think Dan Mullen is that guy for a reason. I think you have to have somebody that can find you an offense that you haven't had in years. And I don't think Will Muschamp's going to get that done. Now, at South Carolina, all of a sudden, the door's open and you can do different things offensively. Florida, you have to have this quarterback-driven offense that a lot of Florida fans expect. So I think there's a little bit different variation in what these head coaches are asked to do.
All right, let me move on to item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We started the show by talking about the Dylan Moses injury for Alabama. Let's look at the Alabama offense here for a moment. Chris Lowe, who's an ESPN SEC college football writer, was on the opening drive. The very good sports radio station out in Birmingham, WJOX. And Lowe was asked about what Alabama needs to do this time against Clemson that didn't do last time. And Chris Lowe centered his answer where we've spent a lot of time talking here as well. The quarterback for Alabama, the passing game in general, just needs to be better. Here's how Chris Lowe explained it on the opening drive on WJOX.
They've got to throw the football better. I don't mean they've got to throw it 35 or 40 times, but they got to be more effective throwing the football, more efficient. Particularly down the field. I mean, think about the last couple of times Alabama's lost football games. What's been a common denominator? They struggle in the passing game. It's not just the quarterback. Now, he's a big part of that. But I think that's the thing that if they're going to win this game, they've got to be more efficient in the pass game and make some plays down the field. I know that was Nick's goal for this team. And when I talked to him in the offseason, he said, listen, we've got to get better, and we've got to get back to utilizing all of our guys, all of our skill players, spread the football around, make us harder to defend. And I think at times they were like that this year, but at times they weren't. It's going to be especially important in this game against this defense.
Jamie Bailey in the comment section says Q Cliff Nelson, who's obviously not a fan of Jalen Hurts. Cliff comes to this from the LSU fan perspective. But I do think what Chris Lowe says there is very similar to what I've said here now for a while. I do not think that right now Jalen Hurts is the kind of quarterback you win a national championship with. And whether it's a disappointment against Clemson, I think Alabama probably wins that game, or a loss in the title game to either Oklahoma or Georgia, I don't think Alabama can win a national championship with Jalen Hurts. I think the Tide's a very good team, playoff worthy almost for sure. But in terms of getting it done against one of the other 3 elite teams that are in this playoff, they're going to lose to one of these eventually because I don't think Hurts is good enough.
I get so frustrated talking about this topic because, in my opinion, and this is because I'm a former Bama lineman and because of the running game that Bama has been known for. That's why I come from this direction. But it has never been, in Nick Saban's dynasty at Alabama, it has never been about third down percentage. It has never been about what the quarterback's going to do on third and long. It's always been about the running game and the running backs and really imposing your will offensively on what these defenses are doing. And so when you look at last year included and this year, I get so frustrated because that's just not what Alabama football is to me in a lot of respects. Now, you're going to struggle, and obviously you have to make plays to win the game, and Jalen Hurts did not get that done in the Clemson game last year. That's why it's been a talking point for a year, because he's 11 of 30 last year, didn't have the best third down percentage. I don't feel like everything should be on Jalen Hurts' shoulders. I feel like Damian Harris needs to have more than 6 carries, and Bo needs to have more than 8 carries. And this should be on the running game and the offensive line, not Jalen's ability to throw 35 times a game.
Well, be fair here for a moment. If we take Chris Lowe at his word, apparently Nick Saban told him that Saban's desire was to see, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote you just heard from Chris Lowe, to see Alabama get back to using all of its playmakers. What I take that to mean is Alabama's got a 5-star wide receiver in Jerry Jeudy, got a future first-round draft pick in Calvin Ridley, got a 5-star in Devontae Smith, certainly a very near 5-star if he wasn't a consensus 5-star. Same thing for Henry Ruggs. You've got this collection of wide receiver talent that, for the most part, Alabama's not using. And last year didn't really use O.J. Howard.
I don't blame Chris Lowe at all. I think Chris Lowe was extremely accurate. It's my outlook on the Alabama program right now and what we're building towards in terms of the Clemson game, because they have struggled, on third downs, because they did struggle at Mississippi State on third down, and against LSU on third down, and against Auburn on third down, and against Clemson last year on third down. So, in my opinion, I look at it and say, well, when are we going to change this? When are we going to get the running game back going? When is Damian Harris going to get 25 carries the way he probably should be doing? I just hope that the game plan is not to come out and get Jalen back on track on third down. I hope it's to come out and hope that Jalen only has to throw the ball 5 times.
Well, let me just make 2 quick points here. And I may be wrong about both these points, but this is kind of what comes to mind here. You've heard the phrase in baseball that no matter how hard you throw, if it's dead straight, eventually major league hitters are gonna hit it. I think the same thing's true in football. No matter how good your running backs are, if the entire defense and the entire stadium knows what's coming, eventually they're going to be able to stop it. And that's why I think Alabama needs that extra dimension, even with Alabama caliber offensive linemen and Alabama caliber running backs. If the other side knows what's coming enough, they're going to stop it eventually. And the other thing I'll add to this real quick is, your era and this era, I think, are different in one respect. Because back then, all you had to do was go through the BCS. You had to play 1 out of conference game on the national championship. Now you got to play 2. In this case, it may be playing Georgia, but you get the point. You have to play 2 games to win the national championship. That means another opportunity to play an offense that's very different than yours, which I think means that you've got to be able to keep pace offensively in 2017 in a way that you probably didn't have to in 2009.
I agree with you. Listen, football has changed tenfold in the last 8 years since I was a part of the program, but I don't even go back that far. I go back to 2015, 2 years ago when Alabama did win a national title. Derrick Henry's getting the ball 35 times against Auburn, and nobody can stop what he's doing. He's a load. The offensive line's a load. It didn't matter what was going on. You couldn't keep pace with what they were doing on the ground. I think they have the backs and the offensive line to be able to do that. I just think that so much has been focused on what Jalen is as a runner, and it takes away from what the rest of the offense really could be doing.
Kenneth Jinks, as I've said all year, Hurts does not scare anyone with his arm, stop him from running, and you win. To a certain extent, I sort of agree with Kenneth on that. However, I'll also acknowledge the flip side of that is, well, if that's all you have to do, then why is it still so hard to stop Jalen Hurts as a runner? Because he is a very good runner. Even if you know that's coming, that's still a hard thing to stop.
The argument you're going to get from Bama fans is, listen, they got beat by Clemson last year in a performance for the ages by Deshaun Watson, and they got beat this year and it ran into a buzzsaw by Auburn, and that's been Jalen Hurts' 2 losses. I mean, that's really, the detraction that you talk about him as a quarterback, that's what you're going to bring to the table. I have to see it on a primetime stage, and I'm not one of these guys that says that Jalen Hurts is invincible. I just wish that this wasn't always about Jalen Hurts' arm, because I don't think that should be the playbook for Alabama as a football team.
Right. We'll certainly hear from a lot more Alabama fans on that coming up throughout the show in our comment section. I'll also remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T Entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's move on here to item number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. And it looks like right now Florida's in a really good position with a guy we mentioned briefly earlier on the show, 4-star quarterback Emory Jones from Heard County, Georgia, who visits Florida on Saturday, takes a visit to Florida State on Sunday, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of chatter coming out of the trip to Tallahassee. It seems to be the time spent in Gainesville that made the biggest impression on Emory Jones and Jones' mother here. Let me show you a quote that Trina Jones, gave to SECCountry.com about the experience in Gainesville. She says Coach Mullen, Coach Johnson were the first coaches to offer Emory. They started recruiting him to Mississippi State in the 9th grade. We have a little history with him. After he started getting other offers, then we didn't talk as much. I've heard great things about both of them. I'm sure Coach Mullen can come in and pick up where he was before at Florida, meaning his time there as offensive coordinator back in the last decade, kind of stabilizing the program again. I feel good about that if that's what's decided by Emory. So listen, I follow recruiting very closely. I'm going to tell you, when the mom says, if this is where Emory wants to go, I'm signed off on it, that's a big deal right there. I think this endorsement from Trina Jones for Emory Jones to go to Florida, I think that carries a lot of weight right here.
I agree with you. When mom's giving the endorsement to a program like Florida and Dan Mullen, I think that speaks volumes. I think the fact that she is signing off on, and listen to how plugged in she sounds. When he's going back to Florida, a lot of moms wouldn't even realize that Dan Mullen was the OC before, and now that he's going back to Florida, he can stabilize the program and get some things done. I think it's a slam dunk in both directions. I really do. I understand that Emory Jones, has looked at Alabama. He's been committed to a place like Ohio State. But when I look at what Dan Mullen in Florida needs, and I look at what Emory Jones probably needs, and somebody that, and you've mentioned it before, Emory Jones is not quite as polished as a Matt Crowder, maybe a Justin Fields. He needs somebody to work with him. Dan Mullen, to me, is that guy. And I think this is a perfect marriage if he signs on the dotted line.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is a much better physical talent than what Nick Fitzgerald was when Mullen started working with him. Fitzgerald was really just a 2-star prospect coming out of high school. I think his only other major offer may have been UT Chattanooga, and so that's what Fitzgerald was. And you see the success he's had at Mississippi State. If that's what Mullen's able to do with Fitzgerald, it's sort of the imagination's not that hard to conjure up. And you see Emory Jones there in a Florida uniform this past weekend. If he is wearing that blue and orange for real, it's not hard to imagine Mullen potentially having much more success with Emory Jones eventually than he's had, maybe even with Dak Prescott, who also probably didn't have the same profile coming out of high school that Emory Jones has.
Yeah, and I just got to say, if you're a Florida fan in the comment section, we have quite a bit of them. You see that uniform and you see him sitting there and the flashes going off and how clean he looks in that Gator white and blue. You got to feel good about the future. You got to look at what Van Jefferson is. You got to look at Dan Mullen getting a couple of commits this week. And possibly getting Emory Jones to sign on the dotted line tomorrow. That makes you feel pretty good about where you're headed as a program.
I still think the overall number is going to matter here. The name Emory Jones sounds really good. I think that's a big win for Florida, especially given the timing of how it all unfolds. But, Jim McElwain finished outside the top 20 in his first signing class of 2015. Now, we may have to wait all the way to February to kind of know exactly how the Florida class truly takes shape. But it was outside the top 20 for McElwain. And I believe as much as anything else, all the stuff that's happened in the last 12 months, it's the talent that McElwain didn't get in 2015 that hurt him in 2017. I think the overall number is still going to matter here for McElwain at Florida. How high can you climb? How good of a class can you build? At one point in time, it seemed like McElwain was going to be in the top 10 this year, if not the top 5, back when it was Jamar Chase and Matt Corral and Jacob Copeland all in the same class. Most of those guys have kind of moved on other places. But if Mullen can sort of build some steam and get a decent ranking for Florida, that's talent and depth that he'll use in future years.
Yeah, I agree, and he's got to build it. And you've mentioned a couple times, this is a class that's sitting right around 30 right now in these team rankings. And Florida's better than that. Florida should be ahead of some of these teams. They're right behind like West Virginia and Minnesota and Baylor in terms of recruiting. So Dan Mullen, I think, will get that rolling. He knows the program at Florida. He knows what needs to be done. He knows how to develop athletes, and I think the recruiting hotbed in his backyard, he'll be able to get that done by signing day. It's like I mentioned when Jeremy Pruitt mentioned ago, the timing is so bad this year for some of these coaches to go different players and then have to have a 2-week turnaround before all these big commits are signing on the dotted line. I'm not ready to bury those guys just yet. I think we'll wait until February to see really exactly what they're bringing in.
Kenneth Jinks says can't wait. Hopefully Florida's going to be a challenge and the next few years rise up. And it is going to be interesting to see. It does look like, George, we're going to talk more about the Dogs here in a moment. It looks like they're not going anywhere anytime soon, at least for a little while. it will be interesting to see South Carolina, who we just mentioned, Tennessee, who's trying to build something, Florida, how that pecking order of challenges to the Dogs, how that sort of work itself out over the next 24 months or so.
Yeah, will the 2020 version of the SEC East be the 2011 version of the SEC West, really? Are things starting to take shape and shift towards the East when you talk about some of the things that are going on? I don't know. I think there's some good coaches in place. I think it's way too early to tell, but I do love what Kirby Smart and Georgia have been doing. I think they'll be kind of the stalwart when it comes to that class.
All right, I told you we were going to talk about Georgia. We will get to that in a moment. Let me break in with some news here that we told you we'd talk about when it came in. And if you're an Arkansas fan, this is not good news, as Jerry Bohannon, the #1 player in the state of Arkansas, and a guy, we heard some audio from Bohannon yesterday really praising the hire of Chad Morris, and there were some predictions that maybe Bohannon was trending the direction of Arkansas. But Bohannon, the 4-star quarterback, has made his decision, and he has chosen the Baylor Bears over the Arkansas Razorbacks. So a bit of a setback for Chad Morris in his first year. This after also, I guess, losing an offensive line JUCO guy to Florida here as of late as well. So Bohannon to Baylor instead of Arkansas. That's a bit of a setback here for the Razorbacks. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, Arkansas is seemingly, obviously, trending in the right direction with Jerry Bohannon, and the fact that you kind of take the step back when it comes to this. I don't think this is a nail in the coffin in terms of this class. I think that obviously Chad Morris is going to still try to get his guy on campus and get somebody that they can plug in and it can be the quarterback for some years to come. But it's kind of a big loss when you look at the #1 player in the state of Arkansas headed to a place like Baylor to play college football. I think that should be something that Chad Morris tries to stop from happening in the future.
Well, one thing to remember here is it's easy for us to forget, but schools like Baylor, TCU, they do sign big-time quarterbacks.
Yeah, they do.
They do. Justin Rogers is a elite quarterback. He's likely going to a TCU. Jarrett Stidham is a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. He signed out of high school with Baylor. So, Baylor, TCU, even with the changeover at coaches at Baylor, it's Matt Rule now after Jim Grope's interim year a year ago, and obviously Art Browse before that. These are still programs who are in it for big-time quarterbacks, and my understanding is from some of our folks at our sister site, Big 12 diehards, is that Baylor had made Jerry Bohannon the only quarterback they were focused on and recruiting. So maybe that individual attention they were able to give him sort of superseded the, I guess, late push Morris made for Bohannon when he first got that job.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And Baylor's a place you can recruit to. Obviously a university that was trending in the right direction for all quarterbacks a couple of years ago. I don't think this is the same Baylor that Jarrett Stidham signed at or that RG3 was going to when he won the Heisman. I think that things have changed, obviously, at Baylor. With all the things that have gone on in that program and all the turnover they've had, I would have expected a place like Arkansas to be able to get Jerry Bohannon.
Bo Molinari says Baylor's had some real problems, obviously referencing what you said, and I think that's right. And I think in terms of quarterback coaches, it's hard for me to imagine that what's going to happen with Matt Rule over at Baylor is going to be better than what I think that Chad Morris is going to be for him at Arkansas. So that's a little bit of a disappointment if you're a Razorbacks fan. #1 player in the natural state does choose the out-of-state school, Baylor, instead of Arkansas. And kind of ironic here that Morris is brought in to create a pipeline to Texas, but it's the pipeline running the other way, at least for right now. Let me get back to our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. Item number 8 on our list, a discussion about the Georgia Bulldogs here. And when it is all said and done this year, almost for sure, Georgia is going to rank, if not the #1 class in the entire country. It seems like almost like a mathematical certainty that Georgia will have the best class in the SEC. It has been a long time since anyone in the SEC has had a better class than Alabama. Has Georgia overtaken Alabama as the recruiting dynasty in the league after just this year? Well, Jeff Sintel on Dog Nation Daily today, Jeff's a great recruiting reporter on my program, kind of weighed in on what Georgia's doing right now in comparison to Alabama. Here's Jeff.
Yeah, I think I started writing about maybe 2 weeks ago the chances of Georgia approaching even Alabama numbers in the 5-star haul for 2018. Nothing is going to surprise me anymore about the way Georgia has recruited for 2018. It is going to be a great day for those who follow this program so closely.
So you could talk about uncommitted players like Kate Mays. He's a 5-star. He may choose Georgia tomorrow. You mentioned Brenton Cox early in the show. He may choose Georgia tomorrow. You've already got guys like nation's #1 running back Zamir White, Justin Fields, nation's #1 quarterback. These guys are already in the fold for Georgia. They'll make it official with their letters of intent tomorrow. Georgia going to have a better class than Alabama this year, almost for sure. has Georgia moved Alabama off the perch of the top of the SEC recruiting rank?
First of all, I can't think of two worse people to probably have this conversation than me and you, because we're not going to see eye to eye on this.
Well, no, I understand, yeah.
The thing is for me, and this goes a lot along the terms of last year when a lot of people were wondering if Clemson had knocked Alabama off the perch. And I think there's a great chance. I don't want to act like I'm dismissing Georgia, because you know that this entire offseason, I'm all on what Kirby Smart's doing. I think he's done it the right way. I think he's built that program to be something incredible. And you mentioned earlier, they are suited for a very long run. But I have to look at the track record of Nick Saban and Alabama, understand that really they're down in numbers this year. They're not really able to sign a full class. You look at the grades on like a site like 247 Sports, and their grades are actually higher on average for some of the Georgia for the Alabama commits over the Georgia commits. So I think this year they're obviously going to have a better class. You're going to have an incredible amount of 5-stars. But just last year, Alabama signed like 6 5-stars themselves. I'm not ready to move Georgia ahead based on 1 year, I guess is what I'm saying. I think they're definitely trending that direction, and I think it's a scary thought when you start pairing Kirby Smart with Jeremy Pruitt, with Dan Mullen, all out of the East, that maybe Nick Saban won't be able to reach the heights that he once was at.
Jeremy Pettis sort of agrees with you. He says the Georgia's 2018 class, no matter how good it is, won't be as good as what Alabama did for 2017 last year. And believe it or not, my opinion is not that different from yours in this respect. I think that you'd be a fool not to take what Georgia's doing very seriously. Georgia has made up a lot of ground very fast and is actually winning some head-to-head battles for some players that Alabama would have wanted. That matters here. But the idea that Georgia can push off Alabama in just 1 year, that's not the case. For instance, when you move ahead to 2019, Georgia's also really building a really great class for 2019. But the idea that somehow Georgia starts that class ahead of Alabama because it is going to beat out Alabama this year. No, Alabama still is much of a threat and a challenge for a 2019 commit like Rashad Cheney. Alabama's had some influence on him. I mean, Alabama's still a major factor here. So while I think it is important to give Georgia a lot of credit for just how quickly it has become a real recruiting force, nobody in the SEC even comes close right now, other than Alabama, to what Georgia's doing. It is still a slightly different bridge to say it has now surpassed Alabama. Doing it for 1 year is not passing up Alabama.
Yeah, and like I said, I go back to last year's class. It was incredible at Alabama. I mean, Tua Tagovailoa, who obviously is a big part, Najee Harris, a lot of the guys they got in, Alex Leatherwood, I mentioned it, 6 5-stars. Not only that, you had a top 100 player in Jerez Parks who gray-shirted. I mean, this guy was a top 100 player in the country and had to move on to next year's signing class, this year's signing class. And so I love what Kirby Smart's doing. I think that, and listen, I think the scary part for Alabama fans, at least from my perspective, is where he's getting some of these guys. Yeah. You talk about some of the offensive linemen he's going to bring in. Those are regime changers. I mean, that it makes everything on your team better. When you're able to sign like 5-star offensive guards and these defensive tackles, I think it's incredible. But I am going to have to see it at least 1 or 2 more years before I'm ready to say that Nick Saban is just over and that he's never going to be able to get the number 1 class again.
Stephen Early says it makes more sense to see a 50-50 split. No one can have 5 stars coming out of their ears. There's only so much space for big-time players. Decisions are based on seeing good coaches at good schools with playing time potential. But, Stephen, here's the thing about both Georgia and Alabama. They're the only 2 schools right now in the SEC that seem to say that there's no end to the amount of depth we want to cram into one spot. You mentioned the offensive lineman. Georgia gets the commitment from 4-star Trey Hill the other day. Going to add maybe Jamari Sawyer tomorrow. Could add Cade Mays, another 5-star. I mean, that is what Alabama used to do and is still doing to a certain extent, which is loading up elite players in the same position group. That's when the conversation's even relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost been a lock every year that Bama's going to add a 5-star running back. I mean, it's just happened year after year, and you're going to add 5-star offensive tackles and some of these rush defensive end and cornerbacks and at places that it's hard to find players. Really, those positions are the ones that in a lot of ways separate some of the top teams in the SEC and the bottom teams in the SEC. And you get good corners, good rush defensive ends, good quarterback. I mean, those are big positions.
So true. I think that's such a great point, that what Alabama has done is not just bring in good defensive backs, but true cover cornerbacks. Not just good offensive linemen, but true, blindside protecting left tackles. Those guys that fit those glamour positions. Alabama has done that. One more quick point on this. Jerry Lewis says, as a Georgia fan, he's speaking, I would never say 1 year means we're passing Alabama. I'm looking at recruiting and what Kirby's done with what he has. It's like, he talked about the long-term projection there. It takes more than 1 year to pass up Alabama, he's saying. I think that Jerry's probably right about that. But if you're an Alabama fan, you should know this could be on its way to happen.
Yeah, it definitely could. And listen, I think that, and I'm not burying Alabama over this year. I think Alabama has a chance to have a good class. I just think there's a ceiling on what they can do this year. But really, they're signing like 21 guys. They've got to sign a punter. They had to sign a kicker last year. There's only so much you can do with this class. And year after year, and obviously Lane was a big recruiter, Kirby was a big recruiter, Jeremy Pruitt was a huge recruiter. All these guys are starting to move on year after year. And I think that finally we're seeing it catch up to Nick Saban and these signing classes where it's like, you know what, these aren't locks. It's not a lock to go get a guy like J.J. Peterson or Brenton Cox or some of these guys in the state of Georgia. I think it's finally catching up to them. I think they have to kind of catch their wind and get back after it for 2019.
So, quick final point from me. I think that you are mostly right, that Alabama, whatever its ranking ends up being this year, is largely going to be based on the reduced amount of guys that it was able to sign. I think that's true. But I think it's also true that Alabama heard the word no a little bit this year, and it's not used to hearing that. I don't care what you say, Alabama would have taken Emory Jones, and Emory Jones is going to tell Alabama no. Whether he goes to Florida or maybe we're sneak in and go to Florida State, he's probably not going to Alabama. That's a no, and Alabama's not used to hearing that very much.
I agree, and it's getting so tough at the quarterback position too, of all things. Listen, I was hard pressed to think that Justin Fields will wind up at Georgia when you have Jake Fromm who's starting and Jacob Eason who's a 5-star guy sitting the bench. But Justin Fields is going to go to Georgia. And I think that's going to be a situation they're going to have to cross next year as well, where how do you try to jam one of these top prospects into these position groups that only one guy's getting on the field? I think that's something that every program really has to cross that bridge.
This is way too much Alabama and Georgia talk for our buddy Cliff Nelson to handle. He says, hey, the best cornerbacks and the safeties come out of LSU. We turn 3-star guys NFL All-Pros. And so Cliff wants to remind us when it comes to defensive back recruiting, LSU still got a little something to say about all of this.
Yeah, Cliff, that's, you know what? The goal of the LSU program is to get players that play well in the NFL, not to win on Saturdays in the fall, right, Cliff? Because that's what...
Now you got Mike taking shots at you, Cliff.
I'm just kidding,
I've been
Cliff.
watching you all day
love
long.
you, Cliff.
You've been fighting with Trey Dukes and everybody else in the comment section. Now Mike's taking shots at you. Poor Cliff. He gets it from every barrel in every direction every single day.
I know it, Cliff. I'm just kidding with you, brother. I love you.
All right, let me do item number 9 here on AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So yesterday we talked about the story about the Kentucky player who played with the Rec Spec goggles against Virginia Tech on Saturday. They're like tinted shades. They sort of look like sunglasses. I asked you if this was going to be a trend that sort of took over in college basketball. There you see my man right there, Quaid, doing the work there with the shades on. Well, how about the entire Kentucky team as a tribute to Quaid here? They've all got their shades on here. You see John Calipari tweets this out in honor of Quaid and how well he played with the sunglasses on Saturday. We decided we're going to practice the same way. We're going to petition the NCAA to protect our eyes. Is that true that the Kentucky basketball future is so bright they have to wear shades now?
I guess so. Basketball is such a different sport than college football because it's literally Kentucky is replacing their team every year. They're replacing the team every year. So is their future bright? I don't know. You have to replace everybody year in and year out. Can you get the same signing class? I would assume John Calipari can. But it's such a different dynamic than the signing days we talk about in football.
So, yeah, basketball recruiting is so different than football recruiting. It's almost like they're not even the same kind of – they're truly different sports, but it's almost like they're entirely different universes. But my opinion on this has actually evolved, and it's almost the exact opposite from what it was yesterday. I still think the shades themselves are kind of cool. Somebody said he looks sort of like LaDainian Tomlinson, the old NFL running back who played also his college football at TCU. To a degree, that's true. But think about this for a moment. You played football. There's no marketing dollars to be had in football for the most part, unless you're Tom Brady, somebody like that. You got the helmet on, nobody sees your face. These basketball guys, and most of these Kentucky players will play in the NBA. These basketball guys go to the NBA, they got the shoe deals, they got the marketing deals. They're all world famous because you can see their faces.
Yeah.
You start covering up the shades, you can't see your face anymore. You're actually hurting your own marketing potential. So Calipari, who's typically a genius about stuff like this, he's actually hurting the marketing opportunities. I sound like Darren Ravel, I don't mean to, but he's hurting the marketing opportunities for his players by putting the shades and covering up their face.
Yeah, you know, it's tough. And listen, this came out of Alabama when I was there. A lot of those guys wanted the shaded visors. And Nick Saban, I don't know if it was an NCAA rule or an SEC rule or what, wouldn't let it happen. It was like there was an NCAA rule or something where they had to be able to see your eyes if you got hurt on the field, so nobody could wear shades like that. It wasn't allowed to wear visors in college football. I get into the NFL, then all of a sudden it's like everybody wants to wear a shaded visor because they want to look cool. Devin Hester and all these guys.
Can you imagine how cool the Alabama helmet would look with like a silver sort of mirrored tint visor to it?
No.
Are you serious?
No, I know.
Like some of those like State Patrol like mirrored sunglasses?
Listen, Alabama, well, you just want to stay in the 30s. Just keep us back in the 30s.
Oh, I'm not telling you that's a bad idea. I mean, I'm a traditional guy too. I'm just saying it would be a cool look to put like a silver mirrored visor on that.
I don't know. I don't know. The the trend of trying to be cool and stuff while trying to do your job on the field to me is just never cool. I don't know. I just don't like it.
Well, maybe you didn't like that, but maybe you might like this. You know, I know that Nick Saban took you out to ride his boat from time to time. That's how y'all did team building activities. But take a look at how Kentucky does this for item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So they're getting ready for the Music City Bowl, but also spending some time with each other here as well.
Okay, that boy ready.
This is Kentucky coach Mark Stoops right here. And at first I thought this was paintball.
Okay.
But it's been explained to me this is like airsoft guns.
Yes,
Airsoft wars, yeah.
Have you ever done this before?
Yeah, I have. I have actually.
Okay.
And it's so much different than paintball. It's just these little bitty pellets and
Yes,
they're like spring loaded. It can if you're close enough, yeah.
Have any of y'all ever done this before? Any of the folks working with us?
No. It's a little, I mean, they sell it at like Walmart. You can get it at Dick's.
So I've told you before, I've got no interest in doing paintball.
Yeah.
I'm never doing that. But the airsoft I might actually
Yeah,
do.
it doesn't hurt as bad, especially when you're far away. But if you get up close, you definitely feel it. It's like a little pellet gun.
But what's the point? I mean, like at least with the paintball, if you hit somebody, it splatters everywhere.
Yeah.
What's the point of the airsoft?
I don't know.
How do you even know you scored?
I think you have to go on like the honor system. Like, yeah, I got hit. I don't know. It probably doesn't work out a lot of ways. I would be interested to see how they did it on the recruiting visit for sure.
All right. Well, we've got a cool champion of life. We'll actually give that to you here in just a moment. And it's actually pretty timely given what's been in the news as of late. We'll tell you about that coming up. Before that, though, let me remind you that AT&T is proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, entertainment your way. And speaking of AT&T, let's get ready to do our AT&T look ahead. Kind of a busy night in the world of sports, both on the SEC hardwood and the bowl games. Let me start with the college basketball, where it's actually a pretty full slate of SEC games. I had a hard time sort of figuring out which games to profile here. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the rivalry games. We do have a ranked team on the floor tonight. You got South Carolina and Clemson, Georgia Tech and Georgia. A couple of rivalry basketball games. Does that do anything for you?
No, I'll be plugged into Alabama Mercer tonight. The return of Braxton Key to the floor. I think Bama's finally got their team healthy. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be.
This
a good
guy's
year.
like the biggest bandwagon jumper for Alabama basketball. You've also got the 8th ranked Aggies taking on Northern Kentucky.
How many of us in the comment section though are basketball bandwagon fans? I mean, like I just want to know. I honestly want to know because when Alabama basketball is not good, I don't pay attention to it. And you call me a bandwagon fan all you want to, I just don't. But when they're good and they're supposed to be good this year, I'm all about it. I'm going to a game. I'm all over.
Well, there you go. Also, let's mention the Boca Raton Bowl.
Oh yeah.
Akron against Florida Atlantic, Coach Lane Kiffin's team. That's not bad TV for
somebody. I got to give
night this is
tonight. Raymond Cox, Bowl investment alert. Take the over, free money in the comment section. I agree with them. The spread on this game is actually 22. I have no idea what to do with it. What do you make of Lane Kiffin and bowl preparation in his backyard in Boca Raton?
Did he really sign a 10-year contract?
10-year contract for Lane Kiffin. I'm telling you right now, that would be the most shocking thing of all time if in 10 years he's at FAU.
All right, let's close up the show the way we always do. We're always looking for champions of life. And I got to ask you, are you a Star Wars fan? I don't remember.
No, never seen Star Wars.
So I'm a big Star Wars fan. I'm actually taking my son to see the movie on Friday. Really excited about that. But I'm nowhere near as excited about Star Wars as apparently these two guys are. Seeing the show the first weekend it comes out, and then going out in the parking lot and getting into a Star Wars lightsaber battle here. First of all, this is incredible lightsaber work. Now, do you know what lightsabers are?
These guys have been practicing.
They have been practicing.
This is a showdown. These guys, this is their Super Bowl. This is their
completely. I could watch this all day long. These guys are great at this.
Yeah, when the premiere night for this movie was announced, they were like, "We're going to practice and get our stuff together right now, so that when we get to that parking lot, we were going to put on a show."
Do you know what lightsabers are? Do you know enough about the movie to know what the lightsabers?
They're just the swords, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the light swords. I don't listen.
Listen,
you have not talked to anybody that is as far removed from that movie as me.
I am so excited about going to see this movie this weekend. Cannot wait. Some of you probably already seen it. Most of you probably already seen it, but I'm going to see it this weekend. I'm really excited, but I'll never be able to quite pull off the lightsaber work like that. Hey, thanks for being with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Live. Don't forget, we'll have the podcast up for you on iTunes. You can check out the audio version of the show if you want to either just hear the whole show or if you missed a portion of the video, that'll be there for you. And it'd be a huge help to us if you'd share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC every day here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day. We'll be back on signing day tomorrow as it begins right here on AT&T SEC Country Live.